Right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's session on citizen scientists. And we are honored to have with us Miss April Martinez doing the presentation. For those of you who have not met me prior, I am Dr. Laura Bristol. I am Senior Lecturer at the School of Education, UWI-Kville campus. So we're honored to have with us today for our session Miss April Martinez, who is from Belmopan, Belize. After obtaining her Bachelor of Arts degree in anthropology at Galen University in Belize, she earned her Master of Arts in archaeology from Leiden University in the Netherlands. April originally specializes in archaeology and anthropology of Mesoamerica and the Andes, and there is a word there that I cannot pronounce. It's osteoarchaeology. Her research has focused on ethics in archaeology, primarily surrounding how we approach human remains and the sensitivity involving ancient mortuary funerary practices. She joined the University of Belize in 2017 as an adjunct lecturer and became a full-time history and anthropology lecturer in 2018. Her task has been to establish an anthropology program at the university to create more versatile social science options for Belizeans. Along with her colleagues, they created the Heritage Education Network Belize, lovingly called HENB, amidst the pandemic, which has jump-started new avenues for research and community engagement. Throughout her years, April has participated in research excavations for the Belize Valley Archaeological Renaissance Project, Program for Belize Archaeological Project, and the Maya Research Project. She currently holds the position of Living Heritage Officer at the Institute for Social and Cultural Research in Belize, where she is responsible for coordinating and supporting the activities of safeguarding Belize's living heritage in close coordination with other entities of the National Institute of Culture and History. We are happy, April, that you can join us today to make your presentation on citizen scientist. You have approximately 30 minutes or so for your presentation before we open up to questions and engagement. I would want to ask you to speak slowly, so take your time, because we have a lot of different language users within this space, and I know you're very familiar with that. And of course, the accents can be problematic at times. So thanks, April, and I hand over to you.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you all so much for having me. That is a long biography that I kept listening to her, and I'm like, who's that person? Because that doesn't sound at all familiar, but thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be here. And coincidentally, or by the great divine, or by the universe, I am in the lovely city of Panama. I work in Belize and I normally travel and so for work. I'm in Panama for a conference on safeguarding the living heritage of Afro-descendants in the Latin American region and Cuba. And I bring it up because I had agreed to do this presentation prior to knowing that I would be here. And this particular conference is attached to a project where myself as the research officer through ISCR niche, I'm working very closely with citizen scientists and community members, because the purpose of this particular project is to provide that space and that platform for the communities to engage and do research with the state. And it just kind of came as like I said, a divine coincidence that I'm here working on this particular project and also providing this presentation. I have to be very careful when I toss around certain words, ideas, and phrases around laureate, because I wind up here. But nevertheless, I'll get started. So I used, like I said, the term very loosely with Laureate when I was discussing my organization, what I do. I am an archaeologist by training, and I've worked along citizen scientists for my entire archaeological career. Though one, I didn't know that that's what they were called, and two, I think the term was properly defined or began to get defined in the early 1990s, I think by somebody at MIT. But the term itself, it's a little bit difficult to define. I will do my best, and this particular presentation is strictly coming from experience. This is not a research that I've been doing. This is just something that, based on my experience as an archaeologist, as a living heritage officer, as a director of an NGO, we have come across these persons most of our careers. And it's very different from academia because we've been taught a particular set of skills, some particular methodologies to approach research. And in my line of work, it was never so, I guess, abruptly defined. It was always something that we did. We worked along these persons in order to acquire our information. So just a bit of an introduction before I jump into defining as what a citizen scientist is, or what I believe a citizen scientist is. I want to start with an activity. And if you all would mind interacting with me just for a second in the chat, if you would, to think about your daily advisor, not just in academia, but at home, when you are in a particular social space. Sure, your teachers, your mentors, who are the people that you would go to learn something or to talk about issues that are not just personal, but social issues and so forth? Who are the first persons that you think about outside of the academic sphere, if you will? And if you don't mind indulging me and putting your answers in the chat, that would be great. But I asking you this because this is where I start to think about citizen scientists, or my general teachers, the persons that taught me not just the way to be as a person, but particular life skills. And those are the persons that shape and mold certain skills that you don't really think about until maybe later on in life. So for me, one of the best advisors and teachers was my grandma. My grandma that probably went to maybe grade 3 or grade 4 in her education life. But everything that I understand about the weather comes from my grandma. Everything that I understand about perhaps planting comes from my grandma. My social and communication skills stems from my grandma. So I know it sounds pretty strange, but my grandma was a Honduran woman who came to Belize, doesn't speak English at all, but I watched that woman from a very young age navigate through social spaces that she didn't understand, but because she was so hyper independent and needed to get her passport, needed to get from point A to point B in the airport, she worked through her complex life in order to get to the places that she wanted to go. And that was the first time I learned to navigate in a space that was uncomfortable through watching her. So when I think about mentors and advisors and teachers, she's one of the first persons I think about. So let's see what you all say. All right. So yeah, people are saying their mom, their siblings, their partners. I have a reference group of elders, your brother, a religious leader, your children. Wonderful, all wonderful. So founders of a particular project in Trinidad. I love these answers because this is exactly it. This is exactly what we think about when we're talking about mentors. Um, when we started to define citizen scientists as Heritage Education Network, we were looking particularly at persons that were so involved and heavily engaged in their community, and they didn't realize that they were doing research. They didn't realize that they were collecting data in order to develop something extremely important. In my archaeological life, yes, I have those degrees that Laurette mentioned, but everything that I know about setting up an archaeological unit, or everything that I understand about digging up skeletons, came from Don Tito Pedro, and he was one of my first persons. I engaged with him in archaeology, and he recently passed away last year at like 83. And he knew more about skeletal burials than any academic person that I have ever met. That man taught me how to properly remove skeletons out of a burial, how to identify bones, how to ensure that I am properly caring for them after I have dug them. He knew everything. And his education was not even at an 8th grade level. He didn't even really speak English either. So the fact that he was working on archaeological sites for about 30 plus years and having all of this experience, honestly, he could match up to some of these academics that are digging right now, but he doesn't have the degree. But he's so knowledgeable, not just about archaeology, but many other things within the forest. So when I think about a citizen scientist, that is the person I think about. Of course, there are other research articles and so on that define citizen scientists as helpers to a particular science project. And that is what most of these persons are. Don Tito Pedro, he was somebody that came to archaeological field school, and he dug every now and again for a particular project and so on. And he was there. He was somebody to help. But at the end of the day, I learned more from him than in school when it came to that particular subject. So I kind of went into trying to define it just a little bit, because when we first started to use the term loosely, before I even began doing this presentation, I said, I wonder if there is a clear definition somewhere out there. And lo and behold, I think there is an entire book about trying to understand what the citizen scientist is. And to my surprise, all of these different fields that you see here on the screen define the citizen scientist at the same, but also to that particular set of skills in that field, right? And because I am more in the humanities field, particularly talking about community engagement and anthropological research, I will kind of stick more to the humanities aspect. But the citizen scientist, that scientist word stems from, I think, the environmental field. They're the ones that began to use community members and volunteers to gather data, and they kind of termed them as a citizen scientist. But when they began to use the word, it was mostly for somebody that collected the data. It wasn't necessarily somebody that they would take their work, I don't want to say seriously, but they would be the one to analyze the work. So the way that they started to use the person was to just collect data. But the way that this particular term has evolved primarily in archaeology and in anthropology to a certain extent, we have tried our best to remove them as just the helper or the worker. As Laura rightfully mentioned, I am a part of an archaeological project through the Belize Valley Archaeological Reconnaissance. And through that particular project, we have tried to engage more with Belizeans and Belizean students. In this case, not just having them dig dirt, because we all need the help when it comes to uncovering archaeological research, but we also want to have them analyze that data, because at the end of the day, like I said, Don Tito Pedro, he knew everything that there was about a human skeleton, but I don't know if he could have told me or provided me a proper analysis of that burial, or if he could have provided me a proper analysis of the body that was in there, the person that was in there, giving more than just what is seen in front of him. I'm not sure if he could have done that. And so what we have been trying to do now with archaeological research and our volunteers that come through is we try our best to get them more involved. So as soon as they are done with the excavation, they are able to go into the laboratory, they're able to consult with the archaeologists and try to analyze the data that is recovered. That is how myself and another young man by the name of Frank Zib, we were able to become a part of a Maya Kingship project. So I'm going to exclude myself out of this project for a second because I am an academic at the end of the day. He would be considered a citizen scientist. He started archaeology, I think, in 2015, and he was digging up bones, but he's an indigenous Yucatec person who on his own really redefined and revitalized, if you will, the Maya glyph writing technique. Now, this particular skill has been kind of gone for the better part of 500 years. And this young man from an indigenous community in Belize saw that there were workshops happening around him, these linguists from Europe coming in and teaching how to read and write Maya glyphs. And he said to himself, "But I think I can do this." And he basically taught himself how to write in Maya glyphs through his contemporary Yucatec language. And to me, that is extraordinary, because I don't know how many of us have that type of skill to do that. And now he is able to read and write in Maya glyphs, and he's able to interpret. And he has, I think, a high school diploma. But because he has been so engaged in his own work, in his own community, by reviving a particular skill, a particular writing skill that has been long gone for so many years, is rather impressive. And because he's able to do this, we brought him onto this particular archaeological project where he's now learning how to analyze ancient DNA. He's now learning how to extract skeletal data. He's now learning how to read that data. And through that, we are able to, acquire all of these different analysis from his perspective, from my perspective, from the academics perspective, our supervisors, and so on. So it's that particular example to me is kind of like an evolution of what the citizen scientist was and what we are trying to do with that term now. And of course, we want him to go to school and so on, but for right now, he is truly that definition of what we would want as a citizen scientist. And so we tried to figure out, and this is just a kind of a repetition of what I was mentioning, how do we keep up with academia as citizen scientists, or how do we measure the quality of the data that is being collected, right? As academics, there is a particular methodology tool that we use to measure the quantity and the quality of data. So this is another question for you all. So how do you suspect that the citizen scientist data is collected? How would you interpret data that's being collected by somebody that is defined as a citizen scientist? Think about your mentoring to others. Think about perhaps maybe even your students that are just starting. How do you measure the quantity and quality of their data? Or do you even have an expectation of the quality of that data? And I asked that question about expectations because based on some of the conversations that I've had and what I've been reading about what other people define as citizen scientists, excuse me, the idea of them analyzing is kind of far-fetched. It's, here is the data, I collected it, and they go back and double check that that is indeed the data that was collected. So it's almost like unbalanced trust game where you have the citizen scientists assist you with collecting data, but because they're not academic, you feel like you have to go back, right? So I just wanted to ask you, how do you think that it's measured, or how would you expect the data to come through? And you don't have to answer right now, we can talk about it later, but it would be nice to hear. I posted that picture there because those kids were also, these kids are from Gales Point. They're part of a youth empowerment organization, and they were collecting data on the ways that their communities create sustainable development initiatives through their cultural practices. And they had to do like a photo journal based on the data that they collected. So they didn't provide a graph or anything like that. They simply took photos and they created almost like a storyboard through their photo journaling, explaining the way that their communities engage in sustainable development initiatives based on their cultural practices. It was a very, very unique type of project, I think, and the fact that these kids are probably the ages 14 to 17, it was very, very inspiring to see them use certain cultural practices. An example would have been for me, this young girl, she talked about, yes, so they use their cultural practices to collect the data. This young girl talked about the sambai, and oh, sorry. Yeah, she talked about the sambai, which is a Creole tradition. It's a Creole cultural practice. It's a fertility ceremony that is done 2 days before the full moon and 2 days after the full moon. And she talked about the fact that in order to have a sambai, you need to be able to have the proper resources. You need to have access to a type of wood that is used only for the sambai. And you need to have access to different instruments that are made in the village. So in order for them to have this particular cultural practice, the stability of their green environment has to stay intact. They have to be able to have these resources. And this particular project came on the edge of a particular group that was trying to do mining in their community. And they said the entire community was against it because they need these particular resources in order for them to live out their cultural livelihoods. And it was I would have never thought of that. I would have never thought of using the sambai as an argument for them to say no to this big corporation, for them to say no to this particular company so that they could retain the environment that they live in. This is a 17-year-old girl. I would have never guessed for something like that. And so that type of data that she collected was based on her experience, is based on what she sees at home, is based on the things that she knows her community needs in order to continue. And that type of thinking, that type of expression can only come from somebody that has experienced and lived in a particular space. I don't think any of us would have thought about something like that, right? So the way that they collected the data, the way they presented the data was through photojournaling, and they presented their data to a group of other students so that they're able to utilize that method in whatever space that they have. And that kind of came at the end of March, I believe, that particular project. But the quality of that data will be used, the way that she is able to express herself and the way that she's able to create an argument by collecting that data as a citizen scientist through photojournaling, through using her cultural practices as an argument for to say no to this particular company. All of those things are things that we do as academics, right? They wouldn't call it a methodology, or they wouldn't call it scientific-based research. They're just doing it. And so it brings me to my current position as a Living Heritage Officer. And as I had mentioned, I am here in Panama working with citizen scientists. We've been working on this project for about a year, doing community engagement, but it is our community representatives that collect the data on behalf of their community. Myself, as being a part of the state, I just analyze the data with them to create particular proposals for our project. And so we have been doing that for so long, but for this year, sorry, but this particular research institution has been working with citizen scientists since its inception, really, because we work very closely with communities. And through the first glance, you wouldn't think that they would be considered citizen scientists, but based on being in this particular position and working with these persons, like I said, they know more than I will ever know. So on the screen here, the picture all the way to the top on the left, that was part of something that we called a Disaster Risk Resilience and Living Heritage Project. And it called on all cultural practitioners throughout the country of Belize to come in and talk about how we can safeguard their cultural heritage in the midst of a natural disaster. And it was a very interesting capacity building workshop because I didn't have to go into this long presentation about what intangible cultural heritage is. I didn't have to go into this conversation about disaster risk resilience or methodologies or anything like that, because our participants have been doing that kind of work their entire cultural lives, as practitioners, their entire lives. A good example of what I mean is that they have engaged in interviewing persons in their community, so they're taking inventory. They have been engaged in collecting and gathering resources for their individual projects. So they have been doing all of this. Us calling them to this workshop really was just a week of them engaging with other people that they have never met and discussing the ways that they have been working on their different projects. We just had forest fires in Belize. We just got out of our dry season. Loretta and Joanne can tell you it was quite smoky. It was quite hot. But because of the heat, we had severe amounts of forest fires. And what the media and a lot of different spaces were spewing was that, oh, it's these cultural practices of slash and burn, and we kind of have to do away with that practice because it's creating this hazardous environment of forest fires. Now, if you are a cultural person, an indigenous person that has been doing this particular method of agriculture for so many years, there is absolutely no way that you let your fire take control of its own and it went away, right? And so as cultural practitioners, we kind of laugh at the idea that they're like, oh, it's because of slash and burn. One of our participants is trying his best to teach safe planting skills to the younger generations so that the skill itself is not lost, even in the midst of a natural disaster. Laurette and Joanne experienced indigenous herbal tour that we had in Belize, and they mentioned a particular resource called copal. It comes from a tree. It's a particular wax that you burn for a cleansing ritual. It's a Maya tradition here at home. And the fact that we need to continue planting these trees, it's a very delicate process. The copal tree is one of those trees that can incend on its own. It's like a fire tree. And so the method of carefully planting and caring for that tree is essential, and it's only known to indigenous communities. And because we have had so many natural disasters, because we have had the problem of brain drain, persons migrating out of their villages, the skill, the ICH, the living heritage is being lost. So one of our participants, he decided that I'm going to teach that skill. And he went on into his own community, gathered data of how many people he thought would be interested in doing this project, gathered the resources that he need, applied for the funding and so forth to get his project started. Does that sound familiar to you? And I ask that because I think that's what we all do. The fact that he doesn't have a degree doesn't make him unequipped to do this at all. And that's why I mentioned that as persons here in Belize, through this institution, we have been working with citizen scientists for so long. And the idea of having this presentation is still very odd to me because it's a concept that we've been doing, right, for many years, not just through ICR, but through my NGO Heritage Education Network Belize. I don't want to get into HENB too much because I don't know how much time I have left, but I will get into the Culture Symposium. So Heritage Education Network Belize is founded by myself and 3 other archaeologists. And we wanted to create a platform for community members to express themselves during COVID. Basically, DRR at its finest. How do we safeguard living heritage in the midst of a disaster? COVID was a disaster, HENB was a solution. But because we wanted to engage more with the wider Belizean population, we knew about all of these communities that were engaging in projects and these citizen scientists that were collecting data. And we created a symposium, which is a very academic space for people to present on their work or on their projects. Joanna's had the pleasure of hosting one of our days, and she was able to see some of the presentations. And we have had about 3 days of presentations back to back with international and national researchers, but a good amount of citizen scientists. And the reason why we wanted to include these citizen scientists is exactly what I've been talking about for the past few minutes. Where do we start to take the persons that collect all of this data seriously? A good, I talked about Frank, the link, the glyph, the Maya glyph indigenous person. And that was something that he took full force of. You know, he now created a business out of that. And there are so many other persons like him that have done incredible projects in just the most beautiful projects that you could think of, utilizing methods that are academic, but because they're not, you know, they don't have a title or anything like that, they don't even know that they're utilizing these academic methodologies. We wanted to create a platform for them to be able to express themselves, to be able to talk about their project in a safe space. People could take them seriously. And we did that, and it brought forth a particular new way that people engage with academia. One of our participants, I think 2 or 3 years ago, he said, "But I'm a tour guide. I don't know how to, like, I'm not doing anything scientific or academic." And the reality is that he opened a glyph school. So he is doing something incredible in the community. We had one of our practitioners revitalize an ancient ball game that was lost for many years. We've had persons teaching drumming techniques, drum making, and language schools, you know, to teach Garifuna and Maya, and they're all in these unorthodox spaces that are not academic. And we just wanted people to know about them, because the reality is that that does take amount of research and work to be able to develop projects like these. And so we really needed these persons to feel like they were welcomed in a space that normally academia wouldn't welcome them into. And those projects were probably our most successful. People came to watch those presentations. So I really want to kind of hone in and kind of give myself a little marketing plug here, because what we have done is we have created culture, which means keeping up with languages, culture, heritage, and the arts. So it's an acronym. We wanted to make sure that culture is accessible for everyone. And so we didn't just make a symposium, we made it online for everybody to see, and we ensured that their presentations were available on all of our social media platforms for people to download, for people to be able to have one-on-one with one-on-one contact with the different researchers. Because a lot of these presentations were well done in terms of, I started from here and I ended up here. Very, very precise research methodological presentations, even if they didn't know that that is what they were doing. And we created this space where now everybody, I even had, when I was still teaching, I even had students reference some of these presentations. And, you know, they had the proper research that they were looking at. It just became this space that people felt seen and heard. Persons not in academia felt like they could engage in projects that perhaps maybe I didn't go to school for, but I am utilizing my analytical skills, my critical thinking skills. I am gathering data. I am able to present it and utilize my communication skills. I am creating a webinar-like presentation because we have them pre-record their presentations, and we just display. So all of these technical skills, these communication skills, analytical skills, critical thinking skills are coming from these community members that are not in academia. They're utilizing these skills that students go to school for and try to hone for many, many years. And here we have, like, for example, Miss Felicita Canton is in her late 70s, and she just learned how to properly set up Zoom. And now they have an Instagram page to show their revitalization of the Maya ball game. So all of these different spaces for the culture symposium became prevalent for people to hone skills that they didn't know that they had. And this is where, again, we're seeing a completely different turn of that term, citizen scientist, because now we're going beyond just data collection. We are making sure that they analyze that data. They're making sure that they're able to understand what they're doing. So a good example is this young man right here that I have on the screen. His name is Abdon Zib, and they are co-managers of the largest nature reserve in Belize, the Don Eligio Pante National Park. And the Don Eligio National Park is the only reserve that is co-managed by an indigenous group and the state. And the amount of work that they do, the tours that they facilitate, the projects, it's all based on indigeneity. And whenever somebody comes in, that is the tour that they have. They have a very well-rounded, thought-out tour with talking about medicinal traditional practices. But Don Eligio Pante was probably the greatest herbal practitioner that we've had in Belize. So utilizing that space, having that national park, being the only indigenous group that co-manages a natural reserve in the entire country, that is something special to talk about. And when we brought the idea to Mr. Abdon, he was like, I don't see what's so special about it, because they're living in this space. When they presented it, you know, it created such a ruckus that we ended up having to take Ambassador Michelle Kwan of the United States for her to see that park personally. So we have created these pockets of spaces where people, citizen scientists, didn't think that their projects and their endeavors and their initiatives were something to project. But now through culture, those are the papers that are the most popular. Am I done? Yeah. Looks like that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, April. A lot of things to think about. So before we get into the question and answer segment, I'd like to invite my colleague, Professor Vonani, to do a reflection on your presentation, and then we'll open the floor up for questions. Thanks for that. So Vonani.
Thank you.
Yes, good evening, good afternoon again, and good morning that side. Thank you very much for a lot to think about. Miss April, there's lots of parallels that I was jotting down that you probably did not imagine that you will be evoking. So I want to just put it up front that because I'm deeply involved in these kinds of work and self-critique, I may not do justice just on what you said, but I will be plugging experiences in your presentation. I guess that will be okay. And I'll raise a couple of issues as well that I grapple with so that you also share with us your insights and experiences. So you rightfully started showing the difficulties in defining the concepts, the concept of citizen science, and also gave us input in terms of how different disciplines or orientations would define it, aligned or more inclined to their orientation. And obviously gave us that interactive, reflective session where we needed to reflect on who do we learn from the most, or who's the teacher, the helper, the worker in our lives. I'm one of those that said, you know, the elders in my community are also like moving compendium for lots of learning and lessons. So that was a powerful exercise for us to reflect on and to depart with you on the presentation. And then I just want to throw out there, it brought a question about data. So they are data collectors who do not know that they're collecting data. That's my simplified version. And I wanted to problematize that, and I'll hopefully get back to it, or you will assist us as we engage. Then I liked that you moved on to give us a practical case study on the work you do and the real people. How do we keep up with the issues of quality and measurement, expectations, and so forth? And again, I want to put a question there because a lot of those questions are genuine, and I think most of the colleagues on the platform and the students can relate with that hustling or that spaces where one is unsettled with these questions. And so let me throw it out there for colleagues to start reflecting about that, because in the spaces where I also work, we have difficulties. For example, if we're working with indigenous communities or traditional healers, and then we talk about quality, then the problem becomes whose quality? How is quality defined in that space? Do we involve them in defining their quality? And what is academia, and what is the contrast? I was also thinking of the word organic intellectual, the Gramsci, the Antonio Gramsci's concept, and you know, the parallels And all this I'm throwing out there just to encourage further reflections in the difficulties in contrasting the two using same standards or same measurements. I liked when you also gave examples of the difficulties or the learning, let me put it that way, where us assuming that we are the academics, having to learn some of the cultural practices or the inspiring ways in which the citizen scientists may come to the same kind of data, but using different methods. You gave example of photojournaling and other cultural practices. And I liked when you showed the example of, I think Mpateleni is on the platform because what you said in this project, I think you called it a sambaye, where they were using their cultural practices to protect the environment or to defend some protection of, we could say, the key sites or sacred sites, and how that work is crucial to sustainability, even for the scientists. How, for example, you gave example of the disaster risk resilience during COVID-19 pandemic. And again, I'm throwing to the colleagues because I want to provoke some further thinking. We do know that in South Africa, for example, we went back to our traditional cultural practices and in what we knew about, respiratory infections and how to prevent and how to be resilient. We couldn't have had, the ventilators that were flashed on televisions and so forth, that we do think we managed our situation utilizing, we built that resilience that you were talking about, utilizing our cultural practices. Yet we were not, if I were to problematize it further or politicize it, for a lack of a better word, when the family meetings were called by the president, it usually was exclusive. And only later did the call for traditional healers and indigenous knowledge holders took place. So I'm just throwing it out there because I think there were parallels in what you were saying. But also I want to congratulate you. Kudos for the work that you do, which is also very crucial in South African context. And I would like some of the colleagues like Mpateleni to link up with you, because and the lecturers in indigenous knowledge system and heritage, because when you talked then about creating businesses or opportunities for sustainable livelihoods through those practices, or gathering and preserving resources I thought about what we're grappling with as a country in that space and would like to learn more about the projects that you were giving as an example that emerged, you know, the drumming techniques, the schools, yeah, all the businesses that you gave as an example. And rightfully saying that they wouldn't call it that. We have, in my view, we always have a quick way of creating fancy, attractive names or concepts for something that our ancestors have been doing for centuries. So how do we then look at that way, consider the issues of benefit sharing and acknowledging them as core creators and core designs of methodologies and so forth. Just quickly as an example, a couple of years ago, our Department of Science and Innovation created a space where, as the academic, and I put academic really in inverted commas, researcher, for you to be recognized as a good scholar, for the lack of a better word, you would have to create spaces in your presentation, in the conferences, for your citizen scientist partner to co-present with you. And that was the deliberate push for us to recognize this co-creation and co-design. I say this knowing very well that we are not there yet, but what you said reminded us of, at least it reminded me of that, and it pushed me to that space of deep reflection about how else should we be doing this in order to recognize and acknowledge and respect them as the key partners with their capacity to create their own measurements and standards if enabled, like you argued. The one example of your project that you created, the culture, it's also very, I know you didn't give details, but it's something that we will be interested in learning more about. I also noted that there is in your slide a call for abstract that is closing. Is it tomorrow? And I wanted to just note that and to encourage, if it's open for colleagues who are on the platform, to check this out, because I think we can learn a lot from that. But it's so true also what you said about the feedback that came from the citizen scientist, where you were giving example of how empowering the process could be if they are enabled, or if the environment is created where they are able to learn, for example, from an academic, how to use Zoom and how to, sign up online for this or that. Albeit all the other challenges of, access and inequality, lack of resources, and so forth. So I just wanted to raise those few issues to encourage further conversation, to say that what you were presenting and the case studies and the examples that you were giving were very relatable in at least our context, and we would like, well, I'm curious to hear what others have to say in the platform about some of the things that I may have missed in the reflections and some of the questions that I have raised. So in this way, I am opening up colleagues to those kinds of input and conversations. And then we will then come back to you, Ms. April, for your comments and reactions. Let me just check on the platform if there's
Before we get into questions, I do want to say that yes, I know we have a deadline there tomorrow, but that will be extended for culture. We have not turned away international presentations. I believe last year we had somebody from Rwanda send us that presentation. And even though it was not about Belize, he was able to connect the theme, the presentation theme, to his own work that he did in Rwanda. So, hey, if you all want to send your abstracts in, absolutely no problem. So I just wanted to make that note.
Put it that. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm so happy that is possible because, you know, there's a lot of learning that we can have from each other that way. So colleagues, anybody, let me see.
Yes, Prof. My hand is up.
Prof, yes, please
Yeah.
go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I joined the discussions just in the middle, but I was really, I think Miss April really touched my heart. I was very close to tears because what she's saying is the same discourses that we talk about daily. It's about issues of ways of knowing. It's about, she coined it as citizen scientist. Other people will call it an open science. Others will call it an community engagement. But what she's trying to share with us is about how then, or making us conscious as to how citizen scientists' voices have been muted. And then how best can we make sure that we valorize those voices? It's about approaches of making these citizens, scientists to become activists and also their voices to be heard. She also touches on issues of ways of data praxis or data analysis and interpretation, on how knowledge is actually constructed. Because we are heavily informed by what we call it the professional scientists. So, and then ignoring our citizen scientists who actually has and then possesses a knowledge, at times even more than this professional scientist. So the point that I think she was really pushing forth is about the role of the citizen scientists, development of the epistemic roles that they should be playing in knowledge construction. Along those lines of how data is collated, how data is analyzed, and also how data could be interpreted. So listening to what she was sharing with us, I can also confidence saying that when we refer to citizens, then what man was referring to orthodox scientists who orthodox orthodox knowledge. My internet is a little stable, but I'll try to make my point very brief. So thanks also for sharing with us that citizens are more just are not just merely just collaborators, but these are people who are bringing a deeper engagement into knowledge constructions. And then you demonstrated that with, I think when we were listening to you, that we can get 4 prongs in terms of how this approach of citizen scientists can work. The first one in its approach is very democratic. It's a democratic action. It's also deliberative. It's also participatory or collaborative. And lastly, what is important about citizen scientists is context sensitive. So for me, as I listen to you, this is more of an approach which is empowering those marginalized voices, those muted voices. And then citizen science is about bringing that kind of a balance of power dynamics. We know there are powers and power issues there. So here we're talking about the power dynamic, the citizen scientists on the other side, and what we call it, the professional scientists on the other side. So how best can we balance the pendulum not to swing into a particular angle? So I think one of the things that when I was listening to you, is how best can we then manage to handle the data in terms of how data is generated, how do we handle that particular data, how can we interpret that data, and then also how can we implement that data. And then I was Laurette's comment, where she's trying to also to amplify the fact that this is more towards a participatory action research kind of an approach by acknowledging those community scientists. And then when I was listening to you, I could hear this vibe that you are conscientizing us about how dominant discourses have put, skepticism this kind of scientist, the citizen scientists. I know they will be painting them with different, markers so that we can understand their knowledge as unscientific. That will need a kind of a professional scientific tools to cleanse the data that is generated there. But you are conscientizing us about that to say their knowledge is still very scientific and these people are very knowledgeable. And then just as a way of, summing up, I think I've learned also so much to say, the dominant discourses is bias in its nature because we are beginning and following a certain golden trends and standards of how we collect data, how data should be generated, and then not acknowledging what citizen scientists could also contribute towards the data sets. And then very lastly, one other point that I listened when I was listening to you, you make an example about the living heritage, how a particular plant can be, a particular tree can be planted. I think what you were sharing with us is with citizen scientists, it's about validation. It's about validation of knowledge systems in the different pyramids of knowledge. So, and then my last word is on issues around this citizens, to say the construct itself is not one thing. It's a very fluid thing. It's very dynamic. It's not a homogeneous kind of a construct because it could relate to many things. If we don't want to say a citizen scientist, others could call about community science or community scientist. Others could tweak it and then talk about community engagement, which would still talk about community scientists. Others will also even refer to open science. But over and above, this talks to the same thing. I mean, the differences that are there are very subtle. So that's my what I managed to catch. And thank you very much. I appreciate that. Prof, let me pause there. And thanks for everything.
Thanks, Prof. Vanani. Thanks, Prof. Mobatsi. April, I want to give you a few minutes to just respond to some of those comments while we give other persons in the room the opportunity to think about any questions that they may have. So colleagues, think about the questions, raise your hand, and we can take your questions. But April, if you can come back now based upon what has been shared by both Prof. Vanani and Mobatsi.
I just wanted to
Fumani,
touch
I did see.
Oh,
Sorry,
sorry.
Fumani, I saw your hand. So as soon as April is done, we're going to bring it in. Go ahead, April.
I just wanted to touch on something that I think both commentators made. These efforts are not without its challenges. For example, the culture symposium, we had to make it into a way where these abstracts would be accepted. A lot of the first-time presenters, the directors, the volunteers at Heritage Education Network had to really be a part of the mechanisms. So for example, for our first-time presenters that never recorded a presentation before, we had to ensure that we had steps to make them understand how to do these recordings. We created one-on-one platforms. We had a digital literacy training for some of our older community members so that they could engage with us. So it's not without its efforts. And this is particularly in the fields of archaeology and heritage work. So I can't speak for other sciences and other fields, but because the 4 founders of HENB were archaeologists that truly realized that our work could not be done without the community scientists, without their efforts, without their help in data collecting, we would not be able to do archaeology. And it's because of that realization that we were able to create this platform. There are many other archaeologists that have not recognized that have not seen the value of citizen scientists. And because of that, we have not been able to generate the progress that we would want. But with that said, thank you both for your comments, and I look forward for the next question.
Thanks for that, April. Fumani, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lorette. April, I'm also impressed and quite provoking presentation. My colleagues have already covered a lot of critical issues of which I concur. I think from my side, it's really to commend you on engaging young people as active participants and knowledge constructors. And again, using the relevant, user-friendly, relevant methodological approaches or methods such as photojournaling to really give them agency in the work that they do. Because I don't know, in terms of engaging young people, is it really a challenge in terms of ethics? And yeah, I just want to hear from that, because there's still some reluctance in terms of doing research with young people. We still do research about them, and we don't actually engage them as active. We see them as subjects of research. And the methodological approaches that we use will determine the kind of citizens and citizenship they are playing in the in the project. So I'm really interested in how do you navigate the ethics around working with young people, and again the issue of you using photojournaling. What are some of the challenges of the successes around visual ethics and the like, because it's something that is very close to my heart. And lastly, doing research which is constructed and sensitive, again, with young people, and how do you navigate around the ethics around the whole methodology and involving young people. Yeah, otherwise, I'm really impressed about your work, and yeah, young people are close to my heart, and I see them as agents, not only as vulnerable. Yeah.
Thanks for that for money, April.
Yeah. So I'm trying to see how I can answer that question, because I'm not sure how the education system is like where you live, but in Belize, our high school graduates are as young as 16, 15. Oldest would probably be like 17 or 18. So most of the time, our young people, if they're in a particular space where they're trying to head up into college and they're trying to do these things, they would volunteer with us. And we do have, as a part of ISCR, we do have to have I guess, yeah, the term would be like the agreement, the contract agreement, to ensure that all parties are safe. And if they are under the age of 18, their parents have to sign for them. For the exact same reasons that you mentioned, that there is sensitivity when it comes to this data, or also involved in particular projects, because I can use myself as an example. I started to do archaeological research when I was 15, and my parents, we had to sign an agreement through the Institute of Archaeology and through the field school that I was working at. And so we do the same for these students. Now, when it came to the youth group, they were a youth group already. We just engaged with them in a space because they were already doing the research on their own. They were already conducting this type of data on their own. What we did was just engaged with them, talk to them a little bit, to see the type of data that they were collecting, to maybe see how we could assist as an institution. And we even provided presentations of how they could use their oral traditions and their oral history as resources for their data. So the project was already something that they had started on their own. We just went in to assist and see how they could make use of that data and how they were able to develop a constructive project so that they could showcase. So it was them doing that work, and that has been the process throughout most of this particular work that we do, even through my NGO and through the institution that I work for. They don't need us. The citizen scientist just needs the opportunity to be able to engage and to be able to express the work that they have been doing. The practitioners, the communities, they don't need us to provide them with information. They already have it. That's the beauty about this whole process. They just need us to ensure that they are being heard and they're being taken seriously, or they would probably need us to be able to acquire funding for their projects. And that's through the institution. And I saw somebody in the chat ask about validating and the quality of this knowledge of culture, if you could just maybe be a little bit more clear as to what you mean, because we were talking about quality and the validity of this information, but from an anthropological perspective, I am no one to validate the quality of community and ancestral knowledge. What I do is I learn more about that ancestral knowledge through the community. So yeah, just to be a little bit more clear, please.
Thanks. So Mukalele, maybe you can come in here now. I know that your mic is open, so maybe you can explain your question.
Thank you. I'm Patereni Makalule on the community-based organization on indigenous knowledge systems.
Oh,
My
nice.
question when I said is about validating and the quality of the knowledge, this knowledge, I put culture, but generally is indigenous knowledge. What does it take? Because the knowledge in the community, particularly with the elders as they are there, they have knowledge of experience, not talking or writing. And the academic knowledge is about writing. If we take the people in the community, especially the youth, who are collecting data, as it is everything now data. They have knowledge, they are writing on their local language, and they are collecting knowledge which is practical, not just sitting talking, but they are writing what is a living practice. But when I say what does it take for this knowledge to be validated, that is real knowledge and it has quality. Because I've seen, as I also went to the academic level, academic, you have to write the knowledge, but not practice it. But it has been put in value, it has been given quality, up to publication, up to be used as a reference. But the community knowledge is practical. It's a living daily knowledge. Then to further my question is about to validate this knowledge. Does it require this youth in the community who are writing this knowledge to take this knowledge to academic level so that it is justified that it is knowledge? Because
Yeah.
it
My
is the knowledge of
question-
practice. It's not a knowledge of writing.
Yeah. I think my counter question would be, why does it need that validation of academic standard? And the reason I say this is because as professors, as academics, we utilize references when it comes to interviews. You know, if you are doing any type of research, the interview that you conducted becomes a term of reference that we then validate through the information that is being shared in the research paper or in the presentation. So why is it that we have to go through that particular process for that conversation to be validated academically? I had a colleague of mine many years ago who did his PhD on math education, and I like to use his research because it was a very different way for me as a person to understand the use of indigenous knowledge systems. He did his presentation on mathematical patterns and how to create different activities of using mathematical patterns and statistics through indigenous weaving. And the way that he presented the paper was that he spent months with indigenous practitioners in Belize, learning their patterns in weaving, the resources that they use, and the mathematical equation that the person is using to create that pattern in the weave. Now, the indigenous practitioner is not calculating math with his weaving. He is utilizing a skill that he understands, something that was passed down from generation to generation, and he is presenting it in a tangible way for this academic to gather his data. And so if the validation comes from this academic acquiring the data and publishing it and made it valid, then why is it not valid through the indigenous person that already understands that knowledge? So does it mean that this particular notion of local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, does it have to be validated through academia, or is it already validated through what we learn and share? And I think that's my question, because we use oral history a lot, especially in this institution, to gather data. A lot of the historical knowledge that we have is through oral history, and we record, and of course we write and so forth. But for us, the data is already valid. So I don't know. I don't think I answered your question. I think I counter asked because I would want somebody to help me understand how to validate. For me, my grandma's knowledge of agriculture is more valid than anything that I could ever learn in academia. So I'm not sure if there is a validation tool for the knowledge of citizen scientists.
Thanks for that, April. I think the challenge, I mean, you've opened up so much for us as we think through some of these concepts, and I am keeping my eyes on the time. But I think the challenge is with the notion of validation, of weighing, measuring, and judging. That knowledge is weighed, is measured, and judged. And one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that the notion that knowledge needs to be weighed, measured, and judged does not come from within our localized or indigenous communities. That's a colonial frame of reference that unfortunately all of us get caught up in because of the nature of our education systems. Many of us have achieved independence, but our education systems give us framing, and our language as well also does that work of framing in terms of the language resources that we have available to us. So I think very, very interesting ideas and points, and the notion, and your question is, why does it need to be validated? And I think even in our colleague's response, she was also recognizing that it really was about practical knowledge, community knowledge as practical knowledge. Whereas academic knowledge might just be written because we don't necessarily practice it. And I thought for me, that was a very powerful distinction. And I'm seeing that my colleague in here, Moladai, is saying that the participants are the knowledge bearers, and we and well in the space to validate that knowledge themselves because they are the knowledge bearers. And I think part of that notion of validation, if it is that we can't escape the notion of validation, is really about its usefulness. Because to your point, April, about your grandma's knowledge is considered to be of value to you because of its usefulness as you respond to life. So I think it is about usefulness of that knowledge and that practical wisdom and that prudence. Yeah. So I think I want to thank you so much. I know that you now hesitate to say anything around me when we get together in our different spaces because I'm likely going to call you out on certain things. But I say thank you very much for sharing your knowledge with us, sharing your understandings with us, sharing your work with us. Colleagues, take note that the Culture Forum is still open for the acceptance of abstracts. Do we have another hand up? I'm getting a message that we have another hand up, but I'm not seeing it. So take note that even though the deadline is a couple days away, that allowances and affordances will be made to receive abstracts that may be coming in after that date. So thank you so much for giving us that opportunity as well, April, through the work that you're doing. So I'd want to wrap us up unless there is any one last, I can make the space for any one last question or comment before I wrap us up. If that person wishes, as right, I think you might be using the wrong icon. Okay, Moladai. So I wanna, is there any last burning question or last burning comment that can be made very quickly as we come to an end? Joyanne, I see your mic is open.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Joyanne. And then I will ask.
I see
A lot of you rushing to the end. Go ahead.
Thanks for giving the last. I just want to congratulate April on this presentation. And I think that the other presenters really reflected why this work is important. And so, you know, that the work has to continue. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that. Mukalele, Mukale, please, you had your mic open and I guess you wanted to make one last comment. Go right ahead.
It's Pat Litole from UNISA. I just want to say thank you for the presentation, but I'm also suggesting that it will be better if when we're working with the indigenous knowledge to also be mindful of how they think and their lifestyle, and also to deal with that knowledge in a local context instead of dealing with it in a universal one. Thank you.
Thank you for that, April. Last word in response, and then I bring us to a close. If you do have a last word.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree, and thank you so much for raising that. It is definitely not 100% universal, and I will say not 100% universal because from what I have seen and experienced and immersed myself with all of these communities, in Belize, we have the wonderful privilege of being multi-ethnic in so many ways. And so what is common what is common to the Yucatec indigenous person might not be common to the Garifuna person in the same way. And I learned that through the disaster risk reduction workshop, where we had all of these citizen scientists and all of these community practitioners come in, where they were sharing these experiences, or they were sharing these traditional knowledges and different ways of living, that it might be different based on perhaps the access to a particular resource or the landscape, or however you will, but the ideas of technique are probably similar in certain ways, or the concept of using a particular herb for traditional healing can be similar in some ways. Not everything, of course, is universal, like you said, but one of the reasons why this has worked, utilizing and working alongside citizen scientists, is we allow them to discuss, we allow them to feel safe in our space, and we feel safe in their space. It has a lot to do with creating a relationship with these communities that has allowed us to work in this capacity and to take that knowledge and, you know, share it with other people, and providing them platforms so they can share it with other people. There has never been a moment where we have infiltrated ourselves in their project. Unless they ask us for assistance, we don't infiltrate, right? We create the space, we create different platforms for sharing, but we have allowed the citizen scientists to hone their data and to hone their projects. And so I think that's probably one of the reasons why it has worked the way that it has worked. And of course, like I said, it's not without its challenges, but you know, maybe one day we are able to share in a online and talk about the trials and tribulations, and of course limitations of this particular project. But thank you all so much for having me. Yes, I have to be very careful what I say around Laurette from now on, and I'm pretty sure I've said a lot and she's jotting down notes now. But thank you all so much for having me in your space, and I really do hope to see some of your abstracts for the Culture Symposium. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, April. Thank you so much, colleagues. And please use your reaction buttons to just share with April your appreciation for her presentation, done in a powerful, courageous, yet vulnerable and practical way. So thank you so much, April. We deeply appreciate it. Unfortunately for you, yes, I've made notes of all the other things I'm going to call you out on. It's just what it is, right? So colleagues, look out for us. 2 things to keep your eye on. One, the culture conference in Belize that's taking place in October. Submit your abstracts. And the other thing, keep your eyes out for our next session that's going to come next week. We're going to start circulating the information for our session that's going to come up. So looking forward to seeing you all here with us again next week, Wednesday. In the meantime, thank you, stay well, and stay safe. Bye.